All right, I'm clicking go live, and we're going to bring this thing to life here. Let me get the shade out of my face. Look at this. Let's get this mic set up and looking good. I've got my Taco Bell shirt on because this is my birthday present from my wife. So do me a favor. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Type it and let me know if you can hear me. That way I don't run into any issues like I've run into in the past where I've gone live and then I've been talking into the mic for 15 minutes and nobody was there. That's so embarrassing, and live streams really are my bugaboos. So please let me know if you can hear me okay, if everything is sounding good. Giving a little mic check. Today's topic is the big one. It's the big one. It's the one that I know everybody's excited about because software-defined networking is what is taking over the world, right? It is. It's just what we see everywhere. And, I was lucky enough to get my hands on a DNA Center appliance, do some SD access labbing. And of course, we've got SD-WAN out there that's, pretty accessible in the EVE-NG and the CML world. So we're going to talk all about that business today. We're going to be talking about software-defined networking as part of SD-WAN, SD access, and how it fits into the CCIE picture. So what I'm going to do is we're going to bring up the exam topics, talk about what's on the exam, what's on the blueprint. We'll talk about how it differs from the things that you may have seen throughout your encore studies or the ENSDWI, the in-sandwich exam. And then we'll talk about, really how these tools work. So let me switch screens and get this started. One moment. Let's do this. Minimize you, pull up that. Got my little chat log here so y'all can see, and hopefully you can see me. I'm using a new mic. Let me see if I'm in the right distance of the mic here, and that way I don't have to have the mic in the way of my camera. Okay, so let me bring up the screen here. Oh, look, there's DNA Center. And there's going to be vManage right here on the screen too. Let's see. Bring this up. There it is. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking a lot about DNA Center and vManage and the awesomeness of software-defined networking. But first, without further ado, how much of this do we really need to know? That's the big question, right? So let's bring up the CCIE infrastructure exam topics. And, oh man, I need my pen. Give me my epic pen. There we go. Right here, software-defined infrastructure. Look at this. 1/4 of the exam, 1/4 of the exam is devoted to these two technologies. And this is where I start to realize that, I hope this is where it starts to sit in that this CCIE exam is going to be very different from other CCIE exams. Let me just make sure everybody's still with me here. I thought you were having the salad right now, right? Yeah, that's Monday. Going to take it Monday, hopefully, as long as my everything permits and everything works well. Should I get? I need to get shiny blue background. There we go. Shiny blue background. There we go. Okay, so here we go. Anyways, you got to have the fancy stuff. So let's bring this down here. Okay, so it's broken down. Domain 2 and 25% of the exam is broken down into SD access, which is DNA Center, and then some. So I'm just going to write some, which we'll talk about, and SD-WAN. Now, SD-WAN is broken down into 4 components. Those 4 components are all listed right here in the notice. Design an SD-WAN solution. Remember, the first 3 hours of the exam is design, which is kind of like multiple choice. It's going to be more like the exam format. It's going to be less configuration, less deploying, operating, optimizing, and more like, given a situation, what would you choose from the following? That's what the design section is going to be all about. You may notice the exact same thing about SD access up here, design. The only place you see ISIS, Lisp, VXLAN, and Cisco TrustSec mentioned are in the design sections here. So you don't have to know how to configure ISIS. You don't have to know how to configure Lisp, VXLAN, or Cisco TrustSec. In fact, there have been many times on other live streams or other podcasts or situations where I've said, look, I don't know a single VXLAN command. I don't know a single Lisp command unless you count EIGRP over the top. And I don't know a single Cisco TrustSec command. That's because DNA Center does it all for us. But that doesn't mean you don't need to know about them. It doesn't mean you don't need to know what they bring to the table, because that is all over Encore, and it's going to be part of the design portion of this exam. And knowing how those things work, just knowing fundamentally how they work, sets you up for designing these types of environments. So let's take a look at this now. So we've covered, like, these are knowing the components really that make up an SD access fabric, and knowing the components that make up an SD-WAN solution and how they interact together. That's really my takeaway from the design portion. So that's what I think here. Once you break out of 2.1a and 2.2a, that's when you get into, like, now you got to know how to do it. Let me just check on chat, make sure everything, okay, we're still looking good. Everybody can hear me okay, right? I'm using the new mic and I want to make sure I sound okay on the new mic here. So anyways, that's so now we're getting into actually doing stuff. And let's pick on SD access first. So SD access deployment, we've got discovery and device management. Ready for this? You ready? Here we go. All right, so from Cisco DNA Center, you have the 4 workflows: design, policy, provision, and then assurances once things are up and running. But when it comes to deploying an SD access fabric, you do that in design, policy, and provision. But there are tools, which they call tools or apps, that exist outside of these that support the workflows, that support design, that support policy, and that support provision. And one of those is network discovery. So when you scroll down all the way towards the bottom, look at that, tools right here. And guess which one is right up front? Discovery. Bingo. So when we click into discovery, we have the discovery dashboard. So I can look at the previous discoveries that we did while we were creating this. And, let's just do it. Let's just click plus and see how this works. This is really cool. You give it a name, and then you tell it how you're going to discover your network devices. You can specify a range or a specific IP address range. So I could say like 192.168.1.0/24, or I could say .1.1 through 25. And this is, probably going to be the best way for you to get started, I should say. It's what they recommend. It's what they actually recommend. But look at this. You may have noticed CDP and LLDP. This is really cool. With CDP selected, you choose a seed node, like we'll just call this seed 1. And then it's connected, into other devices, and they're connected into other devices. And as long as these devices all have IP addresses and SSH connectivity, we can say literally start with this seed node, run show CDP neighbors, and then jump to your neighbors. And then that goes on down the chain. And this is how we bring devices into inventory, as long as they already have IP addresses or SSH capabilities. There are other ways that we can bring network devices into inventory without IP addresses and such. Again, let's take our seed node, call it seed 1, and let's say it does have an IP address and SSH, but then we take a bunch of switches and routers and whatever, factory defaulted out of the box. We literally unbox them, plug them into the rack, and then plug them into seed 1. This is where LAN automation comes into play. And that takes us back to our design question. Remember this right here? ISIS plug and play. This is what we're talking about here. When we do LAN automation, what we do is we tell this device, hey, you're the starting node. We're going to start here. So DNA Center, the appliance, literally logs in and starts configuring seed 1 to interact with all of its neighbors. These factory defaulted devices have plug and play agents that are running on these devices that are listening right now, even though they're in the factory defaulted state. And when I say the factory defaulted state, I mean it's still on the initial config dialog. Would you like to configure this device? Yes or no? That's exactly what I mean. And it has to be in that state in order for this to work. So the device will jump from one device to the next using the plug and play agent and literally bring these devices into the network, configuring them with ISIS, sharing routes and everything. And each of these links will become /31s. It's pretty crazy, honestly. And it's pretty hard to deploy. Not going to lie. LAN automation is a really, really tough one. It's really, really squirrely. It was very finicky. It's very, very nuanced. There is a whole lot that goes into LAN automation. And that's why troubleshooting LAN automation is the longest nugget I've ever recorded for CBT Nuggets, clocking in right around 17 minutes. But that doesn't mean you don't need to know LAN automation, because that's really kind of what this is all about right here. And I thought I saw it somewhere else. Maybe not. Maybe I didn't see LAN automation. Honestly, it could be configured into all of this, or considered into all of this. But with device discovery and device management, maybe use LAN automation to bring it into the underlay. But that is the entire point of the fabric itself. We have all of these devices that are connecting to each other. These could be switches too. And they all, form this gigantic network that's all connected. And then that's our underlay. Let me change colors here. And then the fabric is just like one gigantic network that sits on top of that. That's where the Lisp, the VXLAN, and the Cisco TrustSec come into play. And it's super critical to understand how those things all work. And that's why they clobber it into us in Encore. When it comes to actually deploying the SD Access Fabric, though, you just walk through. First of all, you do a discovery to bring your devices into inventory, and then we walk through the 4 workflows. So in my case, I created first of all, the design workflow. This is where we actually create a geographical hierarchy of our networks. We have to know where all of our buildings even are. And then within those buildings, we give them some basic network settings. Now, we're not assigning IP addresses to virtual networks. We're not assigning IP addresses to devices at this point. This is just carving out space. So like for Louisiana, you're going to get this block of IP addresses. And for Louisiana, your DHCP server and your DNS server and your NTP server and ICE are also there. I thought that was actually one of the most interesting things about all this, is that you see on the screen here, after I've clicked on network settings, this is going to be the network settings that would be applied to my NOLA main building in New Orleans and Louisiana. But one of the most interesting things is that all of these settings are not here by default. You do have to click add servers and add like AAA, NTP, and NetFlow into the mix. And here's kind of the thing. Without ICE in part of the AAA configuration for client endpoints, and none of this works. So I think this is actually kind of a gotcha. Hopefully this design changes in a later version of DNA Center. But that add servers, don't forget that you have to click that button when you go through the design workflow and make sure everybody knows that they're communicating to ICE and over what protocol. I think that's going to be really, really important for you to know. Now, device credentials, again, this kind of gets inherited from the global, but this is where you set up how are we going to log into our devices, or if we're performing LAN automation, what credentials should we provision them from? This is kind of a catch-all that does both that nobody really explains well, but here it is. So we've got our seed node. Here is the SSH configuration that we're going to use to log into that seed node. But then from there, when it goes and it finds new devices, it's going to try and use these credentials or assign them with these credentials too. And beyond that, you usually have to have 2 credentials to perform a discovery and an automation. So you got to throw in something like SNMP or HTTPS, or better, you could do something like netconf, which you can add somewhere in here too. The IP address pools, this is where you assign, again, those pools that we're going to be reserving for virtual networks later, and then in the provision workflow, it all comes together. I know this is where it gets just really convoluted and messy. Like you assign this pool here, then you create a virtual network, then you bring it all together in the provision workflow. So anyways, the design workflow is all about just setting up the pieces. It's not about connecting them yet. It's just we're going to have in this country, in this state, in this city, we're going to have these buildings. And within those buildings, here's where they need to know how to get to the DHCP server, the DNS server, the NTP server, ICE, and so on. And don't forget to click add servers. And beyond that, when it comes time to provision an SD Access Fabric, we're going to carve out IP address pools for these devices to use when it comes time to provision the network. We're just saving these pools at this point. We're not actually using them yet. So let me check on the chat real quick one more time. Make sure. Okay, everybody's still here. Everybody still sees me, I think. Just want to make sure everything's looking good. Okay, cool. So everybody's still good. We're still working here. All right, so yeah, back to DNA Center. Right here. Yeah, there we go. So that's what the design workflow does, is it just sets up the pieces. It doesn't put them all together. Now, the policy workflow, I'm going to tell you right now, I think this is the most important workflow in DNA Center, which is, it's confusing to me when I watch, like I get to see the metrics of who's watched, or not who, but I get to see how many people have watched which skills in our courses that I deploy. So when we do like the SD Access Fabric on CBT Nuggets, it's interesting to me that the policy content, the policy workflow is some of the actually least watched content, when it's arguably like that's the entire point of the SD Access Fabric. The entire point of SD Access is so that we can have these groups. So we'll say like group A, let's actually just call this, let's do it this way. We'll say we'll have an HR group, and let me bring my pen onto the screen so I can change colors. Here, this make this a lot easier. And I'll choose blue. Let's say we'll have an IT group, and with black, let's say we'll have a accounting group. How about that? So the idea that we have is that we want, with this gigantic campus that's huge, like a gigantic college campus, 100,000 people on the campus, it spans miles in real estate, and there's dozens of different buildings. We want these people, we want HR to be able to roam wherever they want in the campus and maintain the exact same security levels and connectivity wherever they go. And the cool thing about it is they're completely isolated from the IT people, who are completely isolated from the accounting people. But then within that, we can have miniature groups. So we can have like HR admins, and we can have like HR, non-admins. How about that? And then we can have like HR servers, and we can, from within this group, control who has access to what, but maybe we don't permit access this way or something like that. This is macro segmentation when we talk about the HR group versus the IT group. And then this is micro segmentation when we talk about which group can access which group within that. So if we clear the screen here, let me move my pen just over here. Look, this is where we actually deploy micro segmentation. This is where we see the groups. And the cool thing, lost my screen. There we go. And then the cool thing about all of this is right here, you can see we've got a source group and a destination group. That's how this is broken out. And all I have to do is just hover over it and click on it. And this is where I can change what's allowed or what's permitted. So it's that easy to actually change the microsegmentation policy. It just clicks on a box. And the really crazy thing is this almost identical same grid exists in Cisco ISE. So whatever we deploy here, right here on this screen, gets pushed out to Cisco ISE, which is what actually enforces this. This is Cisco TrustSec. This is what gets enforced by Cisco ISE. We just design it from the policy front end. And then the macro segmentation is, well, it's not going to work because my ISE is actually out of licensing right now. But this is where you would actually enforce what are the groups and who are members of that group. Well, actually, you say members of that group in ISE, but here's where you specify what are the groups and which groups are part of which virtual network. You see there's like virtual networks here over on the left-hand side that, if ISE were working, we'd be able to see it. But I think this is really the entire point of DNA Center's SD Access Fabric. I'm not going to say it's the entire point of DNA Center, because DNA Center does a lot more than just an SD Access Fabric. But if you study one thing when it comes to deploying an SD Access Fabric, I would say make sure you're rock solid on the policy portion of it. Now, provision is where it all comes together. This is where we turn our discovered devices, our regions that we've created, our devices that we've learned or created, and our virtual networks, we put it all together in the provision workflow. Now, I have a lot of devices unplugged or powered off right now, so you see them as unreachable or not even in inventory. But this is where you manage the inventory. This is where you find them and figure out how they're doing. And then in the fabric section, this is where you actually go to deploy the fabric. So there's a whole lot of nuancy things that go into deploying the fabric. And again, because I've got devices unplugged right now and ISE is out of licensing, it's not really going to come up on my screen. This is really just to show you how to walk through it. But you've got our course on CBT Nuggets, Implement an SD Access Fabric, that will walk you through step by step every single thing that you need to know. Now, another thing that I'll point out here before we go too further off the beaten road, when you deploy virtual networks and when you deploy micro-segmentation policies with groups in ICE, that is not enough for the real world. That's not where the buck stops. That is where the buck stops in the CCIE lab environment. They have said you do not need to know ICE. I'm going to write that right there, ICE, and then put a big X over it. They've said you don't need to know ICE. But in the real world, when somebody comes along and plugs into that computer or plugs their computer into that switch, that edge node in the SD access fabric, that device is going to start communicating to ICE. And when they enter their credentials for 802.1x, there needs to be a policy in ICE that says when this person is authenticated, they belong to this virtual network, and this is their group, and this is their scalable group tag. That has to be configured in ICE. That does not get configured in DNAC. Do not think that DNAC will handle everything in ICE for you, because it doesn't. So if you're going to go out there in the real world, you do need to know some ICE, and you do need to know how to handle dynamic authentication. That's another policy skill that we have on CBT Nuggets, which is what happens when someone from the HR group plugs into a switch port, then unplugs, then someone from the IT group plugs into the switch port. They need to be dynamically authenticated and dynamically placed into the correct VLAN, which is the correct virtual network and the correct VRF. So, woo, I'm out of breath after that one. So there's a lot that goes on in Cisco DNA Center and SD Access. Then assurance. This is where you make your money. This is where you get your return on investment in DNA Center. And this is what's going to help you troubleshoot whenever that fabric isn't working correctly. So, I mean, I see my access layer is like completely down right now. And the truth is that's because I actually took the Ethernet patches. I took the patch cables off of them to use them for my Raspberry Pis so that I could install ESXi on Raspberry Pis and get a vCenter cluster up and running. Did y'all watch my content on YouTube where I had install ESXi on a Raspberry Pi? That's what happened. And they're still up and running. They're sitting like literally right behind the monitor. So that's why that's not. Anyways, this is where you would go to look into that. You'd be able to see things. You want to go into dashboards, then issues, health, and then you want to go into like your network health. Or if they give you a weird client-based scenario, you may want to go into client health. But this is where you would actually be able to go and see like if your SD access fabric is actually up and running and working like it should. Sometimes LAN Automation gets 90% of the way there and then doesn't finish the last 10%. And assurance will be the one that tells you that. It'll say like, hey, this one link never actually got an IP address. And that's what actually happened to me. So let's see here. We covered SD access a lot. Any questions about SD access so far? I don't see any questions about SD access, so I think we're doing okay. All right, SD-WAN. I'm sure y'all are dying to know when the ENSDWI course is coming out to CBT Nuggets. We are hoping early next week it will be available. Hoping. There was a last-minute change because Cisco announced the CAT 8000 series devices, which are specifically built for SD-WAN. So we felt it would be a disservice if we were to sit there and create content for you that was all about, here's the devices you can use in SD-WAN, and then we didn't mention the Catalyst 8000, which are the new devices that are basically built for taking over SD-WAN. One second. Voice is going out on me here, and I need a little bit of my Lebanese tea. Delightful. All right, so Jeff went back and shot a nugget on the new Catalyst 8000 devices so that you understand about what their features are, their capabilities are, and how cool it is and everything like that. But the actual vManage and SD-WAN capabilities itself, it's pretty awesome. It's complicated. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that SD-WAN is easy. I don't even know that I would say it's easier than like DMVPN. But it is clean. It does cool stuff. And I could see like why it's so valuable to so many people because of its ability to monitor applications and quickly make adjustments to make sure that your users are having the best WAN-like experience. So let me close this Docker container for 1 second. This is something I actually did in the SD-WAN course when I recorded what's called ApplicationAware Routing. So vManage, which is really what runs the show here, this is what you interact with and makes stuff happen. It knows about thousands of different types of applications, and it knows how to inspect a packet and see exactly which application you're working on. This would be something like Netflix or World of Warcraft or Office 365 apps and so on. And we can make policies that say we need Office 365 is a business critical application. So if my vEdge 10 right here has two uplinks to the internet, one might be MPLS and one might be what the actual vManage world calls biz-internet. We can monitor, say, how our connection is through biz internet out all the way out to the internet to Office 365. And if Office 365, for whatever reason, is having any specific issues, we can reroute Office 365 traffic. This, again, is specific layer 5 and up traffic. We can reroute that out a different link. So that way our end users maintain the best experience for the specific application that they need. Simultaneously, we can take things like Netflix or World of Warcraft, and we can throttle those down. We can make sure they're having a bad experience. We could even choose to route them through a firewall in a different site or a data center entirely before we send them out to the internet. Now, that's not to say these devices don't have firewall or security features in them. If you're using the C-Edge or the Catalyst or Cisco devices, you'll be able to add these additional features in from within SD-WAN. So this could be like a CSR 1000V. This could be that Catalyst 8000 device. And you then do get robust firewall-like features right here on the branch edge. But traditionally, these vEdge devices weren't as robust as the Cisco offerings. So when these were first deployed, the idea to get them to a firewall would have been to route them to a different site or set them behind a firewall and get them there that way. This is called service chaining. The idea is that the entire environment, all of my branches around the world can know about a service, like a firewall, and the location of that service, and that when specific applications or specific traffic gets matched as it's coming into the device, we know we need to send it through the chain of services first before it reaches its destination. So that's what service chaining is all about, and all of this is done from within vManage. So let's bring up the Docker container and actually take a look at vManage. Come on, Docker. Speaking of Docker and this container and this really, really cool stuff here, if y'all follow me, I'm sure you've seen recently that we had the EVE-NG playlist go live, where we talk about a lot of EVE-NG's capabilities, how to deploy it in a bunch of different situations, locally on your computer, up in the cloud, or on a server, as well as the importance of these Docker containers, how to deploy them, and how to pull down any other containers that you want, and then how to actually interact with them. Like, I can copy and paste between my notepad on my local computer and this container right here. Or I can even upload files into this container or download files from this container. So these are the things that, you might not have known that EVE-NG could do all of that stuff, but it absolutely can. And that's what makes it so cool. So this is a little container, a little Linux container called the GUI server that comes with Eve. And it's running a web server. It's got Firefox built in. It's got all sorts of crazy stuff. Again, I can't encourage y'all enough to go check out that video on YouTube about containers if you haven't seen it. But this is the vManage front end. And immediately, my health statuses check in right here. So when I see control status, what this means to me is that all of my edges, like vEdge 42 here and vEdge 41 here, they have access into the controllers. vSmart is the primary controller that they communicate to. Then, of course, there's vBond, which is where they get the initial connection in from, and then vManage, which is what we're looking at, which is where we create our configurations. The next thing I look at is the site health. The full WAN connectivity tells me that at each one of these sites, the way I have it set up is that they have two WAN connections, one to MPLS and one to biz internet. So when I see full WAN connection, this tells me that 4 of the sites, both of those connections, MPLS and Biz Internet, are working fine. But when I look at partial WAN connectivity, that means something's going wrong here. And I can click on this. I may have to refresh. Okay, there we go. So I see this is, okay, so this is happening. It looks like I've got some WAN connectivity issues between vEdge 4142 and vEdge 60. So that's going to be over here to this destination, and there's probably a policy that I created at some point that broke this. But here we have a TLock extension set up. Now, Keith Barker covered this on, I think Keith Barker covered this on his YouTube channel. But if not, this is really, really cool stuff. You may notice here, I have one WAN connection coming in here. It's the bright green one. We'll call this MPLS. And then I have another WAN connection coming in here. This is called Biz Internet. We're just going to call it that, even though I don't know that's how I actually set it up, because this was, a month ago when I did it. The thing is that I want my vEdges, vEdge 41 here, to have a connection via both the MPLS and Biz Internet. And I want vEdge 42 here to have a connection via both Biz Internet and both MPLS. So what this TLock extension really does is it allows these devices to communicate to each other, and they can say, hey, just pass through me. Just pass through me and create your own WAN connection. And sometimes this is a little finicky in a virtualized environment, and 9 times out of 10, when I reboot these devices, I'll just turn them off and turn them back on again. They come up just fine, and I've got no more site WAN connectivity issues. But there's a great way that you could actually jump in and start configuring what's going on, or troubleshooting what's going on with that. So let's take a look at what we've got here with the actual blueprint. Notice immediately, this is right here. This is the thing that blows me away the most. No controller deployment. And that's why on my CCIE practice exam, I didn't do any controller deployment. Honestly, in a virtual environment, in a lab environment, that is overwhelmingly the hardest part. Like I really believe that getting your virtual lab stood up and running is the hardest part to getting and deploying these controllers, the vSmart, the vBond, and the vManage, and getting the certificate set up and everything. I really believe that's the hardest part to learning SD-WAN, and it's not even on the exam. In fact, most of the time, the thing that they're so proud of is that in these topologies and the way these deployments really take place these days is that you just take vEdge 10 here, you plug it in, and what it does is it gets an IP address from, your ISP via DHCP, and it's got DNS resolution. And what it's going to do is it's just going to talk out to the internet to, I believe it was ztp.viptela.com, which is zero-touch provisioning.viptela.com. And it says like, hey, I'm vEdge 10, here's my serial number, here's my chassis number, here's my onboard stuff. And this database that's out there, ztp.viptela.com, that knows like, hey, you've been purchased by a Cisco product, so it redirects over here to Cisco. And Cisco says, yeah, we know about you. The vBond that we've deployed into the cloud for you is at, make up an IP address 10.10.10.10. And then this device is now going straight to your vBond. So the idea is that when it comes to controller deployment, you typically deploy these controllers in the cloud hosted by Cisco. You don't deploy the controllers at all. Cisco does that for you. They deploy it in the cloud, and they handle the management and the scaling and all of that stuff. And all you have to do is buy stuff, get it on your account, plug it in, and let it just onboard automatically straight into vBond, which gets handed to vManage, and vManage says, yeah, I know about you because I'm connected to your smart account, and I see where you were purchased. And that's how these devices come to life. But I digress. Let's take a look and see. So the WAN Edge deployment is actually a big part of this, bringing on new edge routers. And it does say orchestration with zero-touch provisioning plug and play, which is what we just talked about, how it comes to life by talking to the zero-touch provisioning, ztp.viptela.com, then hands off to Cisco, which hands off to your cloud-hosted or your on-premise vBond appliance, and then it gets brought into the network. As long as vManage is signed in to Cisco, your smart account, or you've brought in a Viptela inventory file, those devices will discover each other and come to life. And we cover that pretty extensively in the ENSDWI course. We actually have a skill dedicated to helping you bring up your EVNG environment from scratch, controllers and edges, and brought to life. Then you have to understand the OMP protocol as well as TLock. OMP is like a routing protocol on steroids. It's kind of like BGP in a way. That it's how your sites discover each other, and it's how your sites discover the LAN side of things within the sites. And it's how you can manipulate how traffic flows throughout your topology. So if I jump back here, vSmart is what implements policy in your network. So actually, let's break this down even a little bit better. There's a better way to break this down. Let me bring up the Docker container real quick, which is going to have us logged into vManage. So there's really two key components to SD-WAN. There's templates, and then there's policies, and of course there's the extra things like security. But let's talk about templates for 1 second. Templates are how we configure network devices. This is where they get their IP addresses. This is where they get loopback to interfaces. This is where we configure OSPF and BGP, and we tell it run in this area or in this autonomous system on this interface. And it's really like the actual command line commands. This is where you actually go to configure it. And they are truly templates in that we can create them with like empty spaces that when it comes time to bring on a new device, we just fill in the blanks with those empty spaces. So they come like, I know it's really kind of crazy to think about. It's very programmatic. If you've gone through network automation, it does feel a lot like that, where it's kind of like a Jinja template for those of you who've gone really deep into network automation. But yeah, it's like we give it a shell of a configuration. Like you're going to have interface Ethernet 00, and it's going to have an IPv4 address. We just don't specify the IP address when we create the template. We specify the IP address when we push a template to a specific network device. So let's take a look here. So if I created a template for configuring interface GE01, I can push that template down to vEdge 10 and down to vEdge 20. And it says that GE01 will have no shut and it will have an IPv4 address. But when we push it down to vEdge 10, that's when we have to specify vEdge 10's IP address. And when we push it down to vEdge 20, that's when we have to specify vEdge 20's IPv4 address. So we use the same template and we can apply it everywhere if that's what we want to do. So that's kind of the point of templates, and that's how our network devices, the vEdges and cEdges, actually get their configuration. But now how does it learn about things like we need a hub and spoke topology, or this type of traffic should be permitted, this type of traffic should not be permitted, this type of traffic we should monitor for the best link? That is the point of policies, and it's really why you bought SD-WAN. That's really the entire point. I really get fearful that people are going to start on the ENSDWI exam, and they're going to go all the way through the playlist and get to policies and then go, policies sound hard. I think I should bug out at this point. Don't do that. You need to chug through it. You need to do policies because that's the point. That's why you go with SD-WAN over something like DMVPN or maybe MPLS L3VPN. So get through those policies. Do it. And that's where you actually control things like your hub and spoke topologies and service chaining and application-aware routing. So if I bring Docker back up one more time, let's now change our section down to policies. And you can kind of see I've created a few different policies here. So here we've got application-aware routing. Here I've got my service chain policy. Ooh, this is a big one. NAT with direct internet access. Hang on. Let me talk about this. I'm going to close it one more time. Oh man, I hate closing it and then bringing it back up again. So what if we have host 10 here and host 11 here, and rather than sending them through an IPsec tunnel all the way to the data center and then over the data center and then out a firewall and then they get out to the internet this way, what if we have something like a cEdge appliance, or maybe there's a cEdge appliance right here that can perform security and firewall information there, and we want to allow them straight out to the internet from the site rather than traversing a tunnel and then going out through a firewall that way. That's called direct internet access. And there is a NAT component to it because, of course, we're doing, port overload. And that's all handled in the NAT DIA policy. That's all handled in policies too. And that's, obviously that's going to be a really big one for you because we were talking about, how are we monitoring our connections to things like O365? Are we even going to allow them straight to O365 from our site? Or do we want them to go through the firewall to get to O365? Policies. Do you see why you need to know policies now? Don't stop at templates. You got to get through it. Policies can be big and complicated, but the more practice you get with them, the more familiar you get. There are 4 or 5 main things that you need to know about policies, and once you've got those, you're good. You can make any policy. So that's it. Let's bring this up, and we'll actually take a look at a policy. So let's do application-aware routing. Everybody seems to be pretty excited about that. I'll just do edit. So let's see here. So in this case, I'm applying application-aware routing to only my sites 10 and 20. We do actually specify traffic flows based on the site, not necessarily the devices, because we can have multiple devices at a site, and we don't want people to sneak out through one way, and that's, a pretty important thing. Let's see. You know what I'm actually going to do? I'm actually going to start a new policy just to show you guys all of the different application options that they have. Look at this. I'll do a new application list, and we can choose, this is kind of cool, we can choose to look at individual applications, or we can look at groups of applications. So if I click in here, I'll just type blah, 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 blah. And then look at this. When I click on this dropdown, look at this. I wasn't kidding when I said there are just an insane amount of applications, and it's growing. This list grows frequently that you can match on. So we can stop people from going to specific sites, or we can change it to a family, and we can look at, just the generic families of traffic right here. Now, again, I cannot stress this part enough. If you're looking at me right here, right down here on the screen, eyes to eyes, layer 5 and up. Layer 5 and up. There are other ways to do application-aware routing, which is where it's based off of a 6-tuple, meaning it could be source and destination address, source and destination port, DSCP tag, and there's one other thing that I'm just forgetting off the top of my head, but Jeff Kish covered it really, really well. Or you can use this little application checkbox right here, but this application checkbox is layer 5 and up. So if you're wanting to test this in your EVE-NG environment, you are going to need to use a tool like Ostinato. So I used voice traffic to test application-aware routing because, of course, we want our voice traffic to be prioritized, right? SIP traffic, RTSP traffic, like that's the stuff that needs to be very latency sensitive, very application aware, and very QoS sensitive. Application-aware routing can actually save the day in that case. So here, there is a application family for audio video. And that's what I did. I used audio video, and I actually did it. There's actually a whole nugget here on how we did this with application-aware routing down here on Site 10, and you can see Ostinato right there. So I used Ostinato to send in a stream of HTTP traffic, SIP traffic, and it's RTSP. I always want to say RSTP because the Rapid Spanning Tree Protocol, but it's RTSP. I know this. And I have I have a video on YouTube as part of the EVE-NG playlist on how to get Ostinato up and running, because it is kind of a complicated tool to use. It's very powerful, but if you want to walk through application-aware routing and you want to use Ostinato in your EVE-NG environment, you're probably going to want to check that out. So there we go. So that's policies, that's templates. Let's jump back here. Let's see. So yeah, I mean, we pretty much covered everything that's on the exam blueprint at this point. Noticing the big things to take away, I think, are going to be right here, segmentation, and that is policy. There is the fabric border handoff, arguably the hardest thing in all of DNA Center. This is absolutely CCIE level stuff. My SD Access challenge within the CCIE practice lab playlist was all about the fabric border handoff. That task alone will take you an hour or more to complete. So absolutely make sure you are rock solid on the fabric border handoff and what it really means to do BGP configurations within a VRF and then perform route leaking from VRFs into the global table and vice versa, because that's what the fabric border handoff to a Fusion router is all about. So make sure you know that. That's what I have to say. Policy and fabric border handoff. And use assurance to bail you out when it gets hairy. When it comes to SD-WAN, know that there's no controller deployment, but when it comes to setting up an EVE-NG or CML environment, overwhelmingly the hardest part is controller deployment. In the real world, you're probably going to have Cisco host those things in the cloud for you, and you're going to rely on zero-touch provisioning. Just plug and play, plug it in, and it comes up to life on your vManage appliance. From there, no templates inside and out, so you can configure IP addresses, OSPF, BGP, and EIGRP on those Cisco devices. vEdges don't support it, but Cisco devices do. And centralized policies are the big one. There are localized policies, which are really ACLs and QoS. So localized policies, ACLs and QoS, centralized policies are where you alter the entire flow of traffic throughout the topology itself. This is creating the hub and spoke topology. This is creating the service chaining policy. And yes, the ENS DWI exam, you know what, let's hang on. What am I doing? What am I doing here? Bring it up. ENS DWI exam topics. Look at this. Look at how deep this is. When we talk about policies here, now they're getting serious. Control policies, data policies, segmentation policies, altering the topology, application-aware routing, direct internet access. That's the policy section of ENSDWI. Jump back here. What do we have? Local and central. So what do I don't know what we need to know for the CCIE, but I'm betting you that if you go through the ENSDWI exam, you're going to be rock solid ready for it. The same thing goes with templates. That's going to be in your router deployment. So when you see things like right here, configuration templates, this is going to be obviously setting up IP addresses and neighbor relationships, VRRP, OSPF, and BGP. Configure and verify OMP. This is the tricky thing because you need to understand OMP, but OMP is manipulated by centralized policies. That's literally what a centralized policy does, is it alters what routes get advertised from one site to the next via OMP. That's the entire point of the centralized policy, is that vSmart is controlling who gets what advertisement, and that's what alters how traffic flows. So when I see configure and verify OMP, I really see that as being an issue when you get to policies, because you're going to configure a policy and then you need to verify OMP. I don't know. Maybe they just want you to verify that you've got OMP peers or something, but you know. And then there's TLock extensions up here, which again is configured primarily by templates. So templates and policies, that's really the big thing. But notice the ENSDWI exam also has controller deployment on there. Pretty cool, I think, that you can do that. And then, of course, QoS. Notice QoS wasn't even mentioned in policies, even though it is a policy. It's a local data policy. It gets its own entire section because guess what? QoS is hard. So yeah, I mean, my advice to you, if you're going for the CCIE, and you're serious about the SD-WAN and the SD access section, absolutely watch our SD access course because we've got that thing nailed down. It's covered. We go through all of these workflows and all of these different little drop downs and tools, and we cover assurance. We cover network automation with Python, which is also on the exam for DNA Center. And so, yeah, the SD Access course, I've plugged it a million times. I'm plugging in again because I really believe that's going to be crucial for your success on the CCIE. And if you want to be successful on the SD-WAN section, study or prepare for the ENSDWI, lab it up. You don't necessarily have to take the exam, the ENSDWI exam, but you do need to cover all the topics on it because I'm pretty sure that this exam will go way beyond what the CCIE exam will do. So now that my voice is going out, I'm going to bring up the chat and see if y'all have any questions. Whoa, lots of questions. Okay. So is there any way to virtualize SD access? Watch this. DNA Center ESXi. It's going to be on here somewhere. Actually, I know where it is. If that guy's still around. I might not be around anymore. There used to be a YouTube video where someone had, they got the DNA Center ISO and got it working up in ESXi. The kicker there is you have to have a CCO account. Like the very first thing it does when you turn that sucker on is it asks you to log in with your CCO account. You can't move on past that unless you have a CCO account. Beyond that, you need to have a hoss of a server to virtualize DNA Center. I'm talking like, I don't know, 24, 48 cores and 256 gigs of RAM, at least 4 terabytes of storage. I mean, it's a monster, but it has been done. People have taken that ISO, the DNA Center ISO, and turned it into an ESXi VM. It's a pain in the butt. Can it be done in Eve? Nope. Unless I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it cannot. The thing y'all got to keep in mind is that the DNA Center appliance. Let me see if I can even log into it. I don't have it saved in here. The DNA Center appliance is a Kubernetes cluster. Everything that y'all see right here, all of these things, these are containers. This is the entire point of microservices, which I literally just got done recording for the DevCore exam, is that each one of these little units is a little container and a little piece of code that we can develop just that little piece of code, and it doesn't break the entire appliance or the entire app. We can even write it in different languages that we want to. So there's like levels of virtualization that happen when it comes to DNA Center. And this really is nothing more than a Kubernetes cluster running a bunch of different tiny little containers. I think it was like 170 containers that make up DNA Center. We cover it in our SD Access course. I show you if you're having troubles deploying your DNA Center appliance, I show you how to SSH in and what commands to run to see which containers are having problems booting up within the Kubernetes cluster. So that's what's going on there. Am I Horde or Alliance? I started out Horde, I changed to Alliance. Same thing with Star Wars The Old Republic. In Star Wars The Old Republic, I have legendary status. I have every class completed the close. Oh, thank you, Jeff. The protocol number. That was it. I have every class done the completed. I started out with Sith, and I ended up going whatever the Jedi side is. Can't see ICE on your lab. Aren't CCIE enterprise candidates supposed to work with ICE as well? No. The answer to that is no. The CCIE enterprise candidates are not supposed to work with ICE. In their webinar, they specifically said you do not need to know ICE. ICE will be pre-configured. Cannot stress this enough that you need to know ICE in the real world. You cannot deploy DNA Center or an SD Access fabric without making configuration changes in ICE. You have to set up authentication policies for each of the virtual networks and for each of these scalable groups. In ICE, they call them security groups. In DNA Center, they call them scalable groups. You have to configure those things. That doesn't happen automatically. So good to know that you don't need to know it for the CCIE exam. Must know it before you roll up to your employer and say, I can deploy an SD Access fabric. Let's see. ICE is not on SDA. It is a separate appliance. Know that. It is a separate appliance, separate license. They communicate to each other using, big score topic, the PX grid, Platform Exchange Grid. This was a weird protocol. I think it was called XMPP. I can't remember. Exchange Management something protocol. I don't remember. They got rid of this and turned it into a REST API. So now DNAC is one box. ICE is a separate box. And they communicate to each other using the PX grid. And that is how, when you create, in the policy section, when you create scalable groups or virtual networks, those get pushed to ICE so that ICE can implement Cisco TrustSec in your environment. how to get the images for vBond, vManage, and so on. I'd love to tell you, but I can't because that would be illegal. If I were to give you bad recommendations, you need to be licensed with Cisco in order to get those from your Cisco software downloads section. Yeah. Is SD-WAN and SDA covered in the SALAD exam? Yes, it is at a high level. I am under the impression, I am not positive to this, that you need to know it at about the Encore level, maybe a little bit less. But it's a great way to get introduced to these technologies. Yeah, so I think you might be right that Cisco may have shut down that SD Access virtualization video because, like, I used to I subscribed to that person's channel the moment I saw it, and oh, now I don't even see it. Let's see, YouTube. I don't even see it in my subscribed channels now. So they must have shut down that guy's channel where they had it done. But anyways, it was like DNA Center, ESXi. And it was like one of the first things that came up. So kudos to them, I guess, for getting it shut down. I don't know how you would, like, why that would really matter. Oh, yeah, because they want to sell more appliances. Duh. So that's the thing. A DNA center cluster, if you want high availability, you have to have 3 of them. Again, we're talking Kubernetes clusters here. I guess if you had the ISO, you could quickly spin up 2 other VMs and, make a cluster that way. So there you go. The protocol number that we were talking about there was actually the 6 tuple that's required for the SD-WAN application-aware routing. So it was protocol number. Thank you for that. So that was going to be source and destination IP, ports, DSCP tags, and protocol numbers. How can I get a DNA Center lab up and running for me? Maybe somebody's selling a used one on eBay. It's going to still cost thousands of bucks, I bet. Still probably need to have a CCO account to get it. There's no easy way to do it. There is also the DevNet Sandbox .cisco.com. Log in with your free account, which is going to prompt me to do. I'll log in with GitHub because every good developer must have a GitHub. And when you scroll down here, you see a few Cisco DNA Center labs. There's a few things to look at here. There's always on, and look, look at this, version 2. This is brand new. You can reserve these. Y'all better be trying to reserve these right now. These things are hot commodities. It is really, really hard to get a reserved instance of DNA Center, to get hands-on practice with DNA Center. These always on, they're read-only. So you can access them and you can click around and you can get familiar with how it looks and works. The reserve only are the ones that you can actually make changes to. I'm blown away that they put version 2 out there. Version 2 looks wildly different, y'all. Instead of having these menus across the top, they actually turned it into a little hamburger menu. So it's like got the little 3 things and then it pops out. Oh, come on. Pops out like a little window here and you can explore all your tools and assurance and everything from there. So I think version 2 is going to make some pretty radical changes. Version 2 is not on the CCIE exam. This is another big talking point about DNA Center, is that version changes were big from one version to the next. The fabric handoff, the GUI that you make, you actually configure the fabric handoff on, is different from one version to the next. So don't learn the wrong version. Don't get too excited about version 2 because that's not what's on the CCIE exam, and that could really cause you a problem. But yeah, there is a way to get DNA Center experience right there with version 2, which is pretty cool. Let's see some more questions. Is the DevNet Sandbox enough to prep for the CCIE lab exam? If you get the reservable instance, maybe. Keep things in perspective. Software-defined infrastructure does make up 25% of the exam. This could be the make or break of your exam. If you're strong in SD access and SD-WAN, then you could be a little bit weaker in layer 2 and layer 3, couldn't you? Because that's 30% of the exam. It's not a small part. But this 25% coupled with 15% on automation, that makes 40%. And then throw in like DMVPN and MPLS Layer 3 VPN, and I 55% of the exam that you've got is kind of makeup credits, the way I like to think about it. I am stronger in domains 2 and below than I am in routing and switching. So this is where I would use my makeup skills. And, unless you feel really comfortable with routing and switching and services, I would try and get my hands on that reservable instance of DNA Center. Or if you've got money to blow, hop on eBay and see if you can find a SD Access Lab, and then get a CCO account somehow. I don't know. So yeah, that's my thoughts there. So can you describe if the Catalyst 8000 series routers are the new SD-WAN Viptela native Cisco product? So iOS XE, starting with iOS XE 17.2, covered this in my EVNG playlist, how to get a CSR 1000V running iOS XE 17 point something into EVNG, because it's a different process, it's a different image than what comes with CML. Starting with 17.2, you can swap between Viptela code and iOS XE code. So all you now need is iOS XE 17.2 or greater, and it can do both. It can either be an iOS XE router or a Viptela managed router. So the Catalyst 8000 series devices, as long as they come with iOS XE 17.2, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to swap between them. I would absolutely imagine that vEdge devices are going to be phased out in favor of these. Having a problem that I made the mistake on configuring trunking. I have to use DTP on it, but I typed non-negotiate and they don't let me reconfigure. That conflicts. Oh no, that sounds like a big problem. Not sure what I would do off the top of my head right there. I'm in the SD Access and SD-WAN headspace right now. With public cloud and work from home, what is the future of SD-WAN or SD Access? Why customer would invest on on-prem solution? Well, SD-WAN is all about, you can deploy a tiny little like ISR appliance with SD-WAN. So that could be an in-home or like Soho solution there for your branch or teleworkers. That could replace their home router, and now you could have data inspection and security and tunneling from one appliance to the next. And it could actually, the SD-WAN solution could actually be a great solution for the teleworkers or work from home. SD Access, SD Access in general is really for huge enterprises or large campuses, things like multi-site hospitals, universities, the Googles, the Microsofts of the world. It's not for small to medium size or like 2 building solutions, unless you just strictly want it for assurance, which is a really badass solution in the first place. Assurance is awesome. Confused about the automation part. I'm getting more familiar with JSON and Ansible, and obviously Python in the lab. Can I use anything I want or a bit of everything? So they're very specific about what you can use. And we talked about this in a previous live stream. Let me see if I can find like images, CCIE images. No, CCIE lab webinar images. There is a webinar that they did, CCIE Enterprise Exam Lab. Let's see if I can find it. There it is, equipment and software list. Making me sign in. Of course it's going to make me sign in. So they tell you exactly what you can and can't use. I asked in the webinar if we could install our own packages like PyATS. The answer was no. You have to use what they give you. Cisco, help! Help us, Cisco. So you have to use what they give you. There's a decent chance that you're going to be stuck with the on-box Python, the Python that's on iOS XE, using Guest Shell and the CLI module. Let me see if I've got any more questions. Thank you. I did have a great birthday. I appreciate that. You might want to, Gabrielle De Benedetto, you may want to check, you may want to like tweet Learning at Cisco and let them know that the URL here is down in the most unfortunate of ways. I know I'm already back. CCI. We're gonna get this. No, not the exam topics. We're gonna find this. We're gonna get it. I think it was back at the bottom of this page. Nope. Um, more details, maybe. Ooh, okay. Hello. Enterprise infrastructure equipment and software list. Please work this time. Ah, okay, there we go. So still not a whole lot of information that we were looking for when it came to the software, isn't it? Does this lead us somewhere? Or does this lead us to the exact same page? This looks like data center. This is data center. Okay, so their webinar, they did have a webinar. And if we can find it, we're going to find it. Webinars and videos. I don't think it's all training videos. I think it's all webinars and events. Oh man, they're making this so hard. Another thing that we found on the previous set of webinars, man, didn't they change this? I think we did this on the last live stream where we went through this, or 2 live streams ago, where we actually found the webinar where they actually told us exactly what versions of Python, what the IDE is. They actually showed like a demonstration of what the actual Linux environment's going to look like. So, no, I mean, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Am I recommending to get a DevNet cert before CCNP or CCIE for the automation topics? Oh, yeah. I mean, that makes a huge difference when you're comfortable with how APIs work, how Python works, how the on-box Python and guest shell works, which is what we covered in my network automation practice exam lab video that was released last Wednesday. God, that was a mouthful. But we covered like all of that stuff on Wednesday's video. So go check that out. Highly recommend checking out the DevNet stuff, especially DevNet Professional. CBT Nuggets is recording DevCore. I am recording DevCore right now, and we are crushing it out as quick as we can. Tester, you want to talk via Discord? Check out Art of Network Engineering's Discord. I hang out there. I also hang out in CBT Nuggets Slack channels. So they have a community there, cbtnuggets.com/community. Or check out the video that I released, I think it was yesterday on YouTube, called The Art of Network Engineering. Get to know that podcast and get to know those folks. It's their Discord channel is where I hang out. So giveaways for Encore exam discount code. There is Art of Network Engineering does have a discount code for the Encore Boson exam. So tweet at Art of Network Eng or whatever they are, and they'll hook you up with a discount code for the Boson practice exam. Or just check, in the link below, or a link in my I think it's probably below in the description. I've got a link to the Boson practice exams too. Which software for CCIE service provider labs? Where to get mock labs and books to read for service provider. EvenG, check out the EvenG playlist. That's what you want to use. You pretty much just need routers and switches for iOS XR and iOS XE, or just plain old iOS. And the book that I am using for CCIE service provider is Nick Russo's CCIE service provider textbook. It's on LeanPub. So I think if I search for Nick Russo CCIE SP, there it is right there. This is the textbook that I bought. He's a competitor, so don't let him know that I said that. Kidding. You can tell him that I'm recommending his book. In fact, you should. You should let him know that I'm recommending his book. But yeah, that's what I'm using for CCIE service provider, as well as an Amazon Fire tablet that I'm reading it with. So there's that. Does EvenG support Fabric? What kind of Fabric? It doesn't support SD Access Fabric, but it'll support just about anything else. It'll definitely support IPsec over DMVPN or vice versa. It'll support, you can do some Nexus stuff with it if you want to. SDWAN could be considered a fabric in a bunch of different ways. So, yep, EvenG can do all sorts of really cool things. If you're really weak on automation, SDA, SD-WAN, then that's what you want to do. You definitely want to get into DevNet Associate, DevNet Professional, study ENSDWI. Again, our course for CBT Nuggets is coming out early next week. So you've got SD-WAN. We have a course on SD Access, so you've got that covered. And we've got DevNet Associate in auto, already released. DevCore is on the way, should be out by the end of this year. So automation, SDA, SD-WAN covered. We got you. We got you, fam. All right, that's it. That's all I got time for today because now I've got to stream Mega Man X. If you want to watch me get my butt whipped by a classic 1993 SNES video game, it's going to be on that big 4K screen over there. I got to go get that set up. It'll be starting in approximately 5 minutes. So thank you all for stopping by. I love chatting with y'all. I love talking about this stuff. Next week, we've got network automation that we are going to be tackling on my last CCIE live stream. Hit me up on Twitter and let me know if we need to do more study sessions. Let me know what you want to see at data_Knox, and that way we can hang out a lot more.